Welcome to the Legacy Lifestyle Podcast. Once again, so glad to have you here. Jesse, how you doing?
Good, I think.
Good, you think?
Yeah.
Why do you just think?
Because I just worked out.
I
I'm
know
still
it.
trying to decide.
Is this a good idea? When we've talked
feel-
about this before. Is this good for us to do this on the heels of working out?
I don't know.
How are your delts doing?
I haven't, well, my delts are fine, but I'm still just trying to figure out if I have enough motivation for the rest of the day.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, that's a real thing. That's a real struggle. So, as we've been navigating through this rule, well, it's not the Rule of Life series. It's the Legacy Lifestyle series. Really, the last few episodes have really been about kind of at the core of really what we want to establish.
Right.
Whether it be, again, it's about living to your potential, but it's not just for you. It's really for the purpose of others. And we're going to tap into that a little bit more today. This is going to be probably the last in this series. And we're always going to draw back and come back to some of these ideas anyway. These are going to be themes that weave throughout the legacy lifestyle journey for us. But we've talked about, just what is, your potential and living into your ideal week and creating a rule of life, a grid work, creating healthy habits that are sustainable, that are going to maximize your thriving rather than just surviving.
Right.
And so anyway, as we kind of conclude this today, we're going to talk about this idea of community, because no matter what, here's the deal, no matter who you are, okay, the Lone Ranger, I never watched many Lone Rangers, but that's just not part of the legacy journey. No, we don't want any Lone Rangers out there, right?
I don't think you can live a legacy.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. I don't think so. Yeah. And so you might be someone who really celebrates that stuff. And so this may challenge you a bit, but really at the heart of legacy lifestyle is really finding your community, finding your tribe, finding your people, right? And because you're not going to maximize your potential unless you are with other people. We need other people. Yeah. I believe, humanity, we are social creatures. And, it's interesting in the last couple of years, moving through COVID, just think about that. I think it was really exposed, definitely in American culture, just how much we need to see other people.
Oh, yeah.
Computer screen's not enough. Zoom is not enough.
No.
No matter how good we get at it.
Yeah. Well, and I'm like, I would like to talk to somebody from like Greece or Italy or somewhere where they thrive on, like, basically community. It's like they eat together,
right? Like
they fellowship their togetherness, and that's part of everyday life,
right? And
so I'm like, man, I wonder how they did during all of that,
how life was.
Well, did they just continue to meet with their community? Because we met with a gal from California that you did your cohort with, that they just built their own little community of people that they allowed into their homes, that they allowed into their spaces, but basically everybody else was, we can meet, but it has to be outdoors,
right?
Kind of a thing. So they could still get together with certain friends outside of their homes, but they had a community of people that they still met inside of their homes, so they didn't completely diminish their whole community of people, so they weren't isolated completely.
Well, and one of the things that really stood out to me, especially, I don't want to go back and recap COVID this whole time, but a couple of interesting observations was, I remember like those first few weeks of kind of that spring, summery time, the end of spring, summer. Remember the bicycles? Like completely sold out, right? Well,
and we actually needed a bicycle.
We did. Our kids were right at like the ones they had were terrible.
They were both hitting their knees on the thing. So I'm like, no, we
can't adjust any farther with the seats. Yeah. And so we had to like kind of go the whole summer. There's no bikes. And it was so crazy because I remember just even driving through town and the bike paths and seeing all the families and stuff. And it was really kind of cool. And I remember so many people saying at that time, like they just realized how much they needed that. Right. And maybe if you're watching this and you're listening to this, it's been a couple years, and I know here in central Nebraska, things are pretty, they feel like they're back to normal or whatever. But, here's the thing you need to ask, as we're thinking about community, is think about all those things that you said to yourself when COVID first happened, when it first hit, and you were spending time with your family, spending time with your kids or whatever, or maybe you were completely isolated. I mean, there were definitely people that went through periods of isolation. I remember just even when our church kind of, went to the online thing for a few weeks, and I remember that first Sunday back, the people that walked in and they were just like,
they were crying.
Yeah, they were crying. I mean, just walking into the building. It was crazy. Just even walking to the building and seeing people that, you'd seen through a screen, but just seeing people face to face, and just the number of times that we heard, I needed this.
Yeah.
I needed this. And so the point of this is whether you know it or not, you need community. You need those kind of relationships. And we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about this. And so the first question we're going to answer is, okay, where's this idea? Where does community come from? Right? Where does community come from? And here's the thing is, the way I like to answer this, and I'll just be upfront and honest here, legacy lifestyle is absolutely rooted in the book of Genesis. As I was studying some different things, going through the seminary program that I was going through, there were some fundamental things coming back to the book of Genesis that I looked at and I go, wow, I really do believe this is God's design for humanity. Yeah. Now, whether you're a person of faith or not, of course I would love it if you would be. But here's the thing is, I think what's so powerful is that when you have narrative or you have story, we are meaning makers and we connect to meaning through story. And I think Genesis really does lay out a pretty compelling case of really what we want. Because if you look at that, and this is going to be kind of the inspiration for this episode, if you will, when the Bible says that God creates humanity and then he tells them to be fruitful and multiply, okay? He sets them into a garden. Again, whether you believe in this or not, just hang with me here for a second. He sets them into the garden, tells them to be fruitful and multiply. Yeah. And there are some scholars and theologians that say that God had made this wonderful place. There was this garden, right, that was in this land called Eden, okay? So it was this wonderful place, and that God's intention was for humanity to take what was in that garden and spread it to the rest of the world. That it took an act of mankind cultivating what God had started.
Right.
And so that God's intention and his plan for humanity was that man and wife. So you look at this here, God establishes a man and a woman to co-rule creation together. I mean, I think this is a beautiful picture. I think this is something that, whether you're a person of faith or not, I think you want this, right? I think we want to get along as husbands and wives, right?
Yeah, well, yes, I want.
I hope so.
I don't want to be in a marriage where we don't get along.
Yeah. So you've got this idea of team right in the beginning, co-ruling, right, to be fruitful and multiply, and it's to really to go and to Edenize the planet.
Right.
And so for me, and for us, as we've talked about this, legacy lifestyle really is this idea of how can I take what's in front of me, the good that's in my world, how can I cultivate it, how can I maximize the potential, not just for myself, but for others. Right. Because here's the beautiful thing. When you do something that's beneficial for someone else, it really is beneficial for you as well.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, right?
Right.
And so as we think about that, we want to Edenize creation.
So does that mean every person has to be married?
No, not every person has to be married. Absolutely not. You don't have to. I mean, I think it's a good thing. Yeah. But no, I mean, and that's
it's
something
just
else.
Really about finding a person or people.
Yeah.
That you can invest in the things that you feel.
Yeah. And so one of the things that we kind of have to, discuss and talk about when it comes to this then is this idea that, in the world, we kind of have these competing ideologies. And that is, and I want to hint on these for a second here, because when it comes to, we could say things like the common good, right? We got to work towards the common good. What does that make you think of?
Well, I mean, on one hand, it's like, I think, that's a good thing.
Right.
But then on the other hand, I'm like, well, what does that mean for me? Because it's like,
good for who?
Exactly. Because it's like sometimes things that are good, it's like, well, sometimes that could be good for this person, but not necessarily for this person.
Sometimes I look at my property taxes and I'm like, who's this good for? But I mean, those are kind of the struggles. What's really interesting though, is if you just take a survey of humanity, there's, traditional societies in the world. And I would say largely through human history, you kind of have this idea of collectivism. Okay. And that's the collective. So it's where you put the whole above the individual.
Sure.
And there's many places in the world where that's still the case.
Right.
And when you had Western civilization, Western expansion, there was actually some Christian thinkers back in the 300s, 400s, 500s that started to notice that, hey, look, God has kind of made people uniquely and individually. And then it kind of expanded this idea where the individual was really capitalized on and celebrated.
Is that potentially, though, also because we're kind of like a melting pot?
Well,
so you had multi-cultures coming into a place where now they don't necessarily have their culture available to them. So now they're having to think somewhat as an individual and how they can help society flourish and grow.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know.
Well, again, as you think about just, again, Western civilization developing and all that, and some of these ideas, the settling of the West, of the United States of America, opened up those ideas, those opportunities, right? Yeah. And the ideas, because really, even for a lot of Europe, you were kind of defined by what the king said, and whoever the king said, you had disputes over, are you Catholic, are you Protestant, or whatever. I mean, like, those were things that, again, as a part of society, it's like, well, whatever the king is, I am. So even though there was a little bit of this collectivist bent, if you will, but then America presents this opportunity where it's like, well, actually, you can be free to be you, and you can go and you can stake your claim. You can make your way. Yeah. And there's still, we live, in Nebraska. We live in a place, you grew up in Kansas. There's still, I say, there's kind of this pioneering spirit here.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's kind of like, hey, work, sun up to sundown, make things happen, right? There's this self-sufficiency attitude. And so, but I would argue and say that I think that, that Western civilization, I think that we're hitting the limits of this individualism, this rugged individualism.
I think that's true, but I also think, you can't be so selfish that you're not thinking about your neighbor.
Right.
But you also can't be too collective, because we've seen what that can do in societies.
Right.
So there is a sense of, like, we're overly thinking about how each individual person has to make it good for everyone that exists in that society, and not putting any responsibility on the individual themselves.
Yeah.
I think both can be they're very polarizing in their thoughts, but they're also, I don't think one is good.
Yeah.
I don't think it's good to be completely individual, and I don't think it's good and healthy to be total community centered either.
No, exactly. I honestly, I think these are both extremes, whether you look at collectivism, whether you look at individualism. And isn't it interesting that I think humanity tends to run towards the extremes rather than live in a place of balance? Because if you think about, we're talking about, okay, you need a community, you need a tribe. Okay, well, what does that look like? Well, here's the deal is traditional societies can sometimes, you can lose your uniqueness to the community, and they might say things like, well, you're just a drop in the ocean. Mm. Well, I think that's dangerous. I don't think that is the way that we are supposed to function.
Right.
I don't think I'm supposed to lose my identity to, the community at large. I think there are things that of, recognizing the unique things that are within me, the gifts, the talents, the things that I have, the things that I bring to the table. And I think there's a way in which community can celebrate individuals, right?
Absolutely.
But if we go, so here's the thing though, the strengths of a collectivist society are that there are absolutely looking towards your neighbor.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, looking for the benefit of someone else. And here's what's really interesting, just to kind of illustrate kind of the differences and what lens you might bring to this. Now, most people have heard the story in Luke 15, the story of the prodigal son, right?
Okay.
And so you got the prodigal son, and this is really, really interesting. There was a guy, I believe he was a Bible professor, and he was having this discussion, and he just kind of threw out this statement of, why was the prodigal son, wanting to eat with the pigs? Okay.
Yeah.
And so he,
as I would just say, he squandered his wealth.
He squandered his wealth, right? He
wasn't responsible.
He wasn't responsible. Okay. And if you don't know the story, it's where the son goes to the dad and says, Jesus is telling the story. The son goes to the dad, says, hey, I want my inheritance, which was highly offensive in that day. It's basically saying, drop dead, dad, give me the cash. Really. And
it probably still happens.
It probably still happens. And so anyway, they go, he goes, and he just lives this lifestyle of crazy living and all that. And then he's poor, he's out. And then he looks at he looks at the pigs that are eating there, and he's like longing to eat what they're eating. And then he's like, hey, the servants in my dad's house eat better. I'll go back and at least just try to be a servant. And generally, I would say that's how the story is told. Well, what's interesting was this guy he throws this out there to some of his students, and he had some international students in there. And I believe there was like someone in there from Russia and someone in there from like Tanzania. And he said, why was he eating with the pigs? And the gal from Tanzania like spoke up and said, well, it was because no one would share their food with him.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And then the Russian said, well, no, it's because there was a famine in the land. And I remember when I was hearing this for the first time.
I don't think any of that's in there.
when I'm reading, I'm looking at this for the first time, and I'm like, what? I mean, I was like, no, it's because he squandered his wealth, and then of course there was an American in the room. It was like, well, it's because he squandered his wealth. And this guy kind of made a joke. He's like, oh, thank God for the Americans, because he goes to the text, and the text says that right there, he squandered his wealth, right? But the crazy thing is, it says, and there was a famine in the land, right on the heels of that. And it says, and no one would share their food with him.
So all three
of those things are right.
Right.
And what's really interesting is I had a friend who for a period of time, he actually worked with a homeless shelter, and he talked about kind of three different areas of why people maybe find themselves in homelessness. And, oftentimes, it is sometimes life circumstances hit them really hard. Sometimes there can be substance issues, or mental health issues. But what's really interesting is one of the common denominators is most often it's like they've either lost their community. Could be through personal choices,
right,
just the choices that they've made. They've cut people out of their life, and they really have nowhere to go. Or it could be just life has gone in such a way they really have nobody.
Yeah.
It could be just that they
don't have anybody they can call on.
They don't have anybody they can call on, and just genuine. And so it's one of those things where we have to be so careful. I think when you look at life, and Americans, we tend to do this because we are kind of like, hey, go conquer, go make things happen, work hard. There's a way in which we can really make that really simplistic and not look at the whole picture.
Right.
And realize that, okay, why is this person struggling? It could be that they don't have community.
Right.
And so what are we doing, in those situations? And so one of the temptations, though, is, you might be listening to this, and here's the thing: we naturally gravitate towards one or two of these sides, right?
Absolutely.
Whether we see personal responsibility, or no, it's community, right? You're on a spectrum somewhere there, right?
It's kind of the super merciful or grace, centered people,
bleeding heart,
versus justice.
Yeah,
I know I have a strong sense of justice, so there's sometimes where I even with my own personal life and things that I strive towards, it's like if I don't do something right, I think that there should be judgment for what I didn't do.
Yeah.
So there should be a consequence for an action that I didn't complete or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Whereas people that are more gracious, they are more like, oh, but it's okay. Like that happens. Just, pick yourself up. Dust yourself off and keep going.
Keep going. Yeah.
And so it's like, I'm like, what? No, it absolutely matters. I want to have an argument with them.
Right.
Because my sense
Stop
of
being
justice,
so nice.
My sense of justice isn't being met in that moment. So it's kind of, I feel like collectivism and individualism is kind of a little bit of that pull of justice versus mercy kind of a thing.
Yeah. Well, and that's so interesting because, it was interesting that I was looking at, I preached a message a couple weeks ago about reasonableness or gentleness, in Philippians. And what's interesting is in that book, there's a sense of equity in that word. And what it means by this is like, there's a way of being reasonable and gentle. I didn't get to this in the message, but, what's really interesting about that word in particular is, so in this Greek thought, there's this way in which gentleness or reasonableness would say, it's like a judge who recognizes in the moment, I can't prosecute to the letter of the law here because that would be more damaging to this person. So think about a kid who gets busted for shoplifting, right? And a judge who has the insight to say, if I sentence them, this is going to follow them the rest of their life. but there's an opportunity here for me to show mercy.
Right.
And that will put them on a different path. Right. And so when you look at that in Philippians 4, when Paul's saying, hey, let your gentleness or let your reasonableness, that word has a little bit of that dimension to it of like, we have to be discerning. We have to be looking at our world going, yeah, because I'm a rule follower too. Right. I was like, no, just, but there are times like where, yeah, maybe following the letter of the law here might not, but you struggle on the other side because you might enable people, right?
Right. So your reasonableness is the balance of the two.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's recognition. It's recognition in the situation. I mean, this reasonableness is saying, yes, I know the letter of the law says this, but that would actually be more damaging in the greater good.
Right.
To the greater good.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to know because we can't know those things with certainty. Right.
Sure.
I mean, there are times our court systems have allowed people off that they shouldn't have. And there's times we've probably prosecuted people that shouldn't have,
Absolutely.
and it's a very hard thing to know. And that's going down a whole other, political road or something. But again, it's this idea that community is this thing that we must struggle and fight for. And I have to recognize where am I at on that continuum. And so I talked about kind of the drop in the ocean. The other way of looking at it with individualism is like seeing yourself as like a billiard ball, that you're just, just banging into other things and situations and all that. And like, I'm just completely myself, self-contained.
Yeah.
And that's not a healthy way of looking at things either. And I think this is where something like, cellular biology actually plays probably a better role or better way of thinking about this.
Sure.
That while, my skin cells are they're skin cells.
Yeah.
They're not brain cells. They're not lung cells. They're not, right?
Right.
So they have a function. They have a place and they are distinct. Every one of those skin cells, cancer could start anywhere in any one of those.
Right.
And so those cells have to regulate themselves. Those cells have to stay connected, but they're still individual skin cells. And again, we could do blood cells and all that. In humanity, there's a way in which I can celebrate the uniqueness and the individual contributions of every person, but I still have to see myself as connected to a greater thing or,
Yeah.
I don't know, ethos, is that the right word? So it's coming to my brain right now. I don't know. Someone will look at it like, that's not how you use that word. Anyway, but yeah, it's just seeing yourself. There is a way in which we are connected. But here's one of the problems though. So again, you might be listening to this podcast and going, yes, community, that's what I need. I need community. Be careful. Be careful.
We do need community.
We do need community. But this is where, and I don't have the exact quote, but I remember Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a German theologian during the time of World War II. He actually was part of a couple attempted assassination plots of Hitler.
Oh, wow.
So here's this German theologian pastor who's like trying to take down Hitler. Interesting story, but he was a great thinker. And he made this comment where he along the lines of this, he says, if you, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he says, if you only focus on community, trying to build community, you'll kill it. Mm. But if you love your brother, you'll build it. Sometimes we can obsess about everything that we see wrong and go, we got to fix this. We got to fix this. I need people. And if you're not careful, there's a way in which your anxiety is just causing you to use people for your own gain. And if you do that, you're going to kill community.
Yeah, that's good.
You know what I mean? You're going to suck people dry because again, it's that's where community is serving you.
Which in some ways it's like entrepreneurs and stuff like that. I personally appreciate a good entrepreneur story where they pull other people in, but not because they have something to gain. Although some of it is for that purpose, but some of it is also just to benefit that individual that they're bringing in. Yeah. Whereas some entrepreneurs only have relationship with those people that can benefit them and what they are trying to produce. Yeah. And I think if you're going to be, I shouldn't say successful because it depends on how you measure success. Yeah. But if you're going to be an entrepreneur where I feel like you're leaving the best legacy.
Yeah.
That benefits the community as a whole.
Yeah.
You need to be about not just creating those relationships because they're going to benefit your enterprise, but because you genuinely care about that person.
It's, it's so good that you're saying that, because that makes me, I'm actually going through a book right now. We were talking about this a little bit ago. It's called An Everyone Culture. And so it's a Harvard Business Review book. And it's so good. Like, it's so crazy because it's going to sound like couples advice because they make this statement, like it's either in the introduction or chapter 1, where it says they're talking about organizations that have this philosophy of better me plus better you equals better us.
Good.
Now that sounds like advice for marriage, but really, again, in community, better me plus better you equals better us. And they're just talking about having these environments of vulnerability and transparency and feedback and all of this stuff in something like what you just said. They said organizations that don't just focus on the bottom line, but organizations that really care about people development.
Yes.
Like these are places where, so let me think about this. So like if you're a boss of a business, and let's just say you have an employee that has an interest in taking their leadership to the next level or something like that, or they're interested in some subject or whatever. I mean, what if that employer said, hey, here's a couple $100, go take this course at the community college, just to enrich them,
right?
Just to develop them as a person. Think about the loyalty that builds into that person, right? Of like, you care about me. You'll fund something I'm interested in that actually makes me better. I've even thought about this, like, of course, I'm a big fan of Dave Ramsey. What if, a lot of employee stress is financial related. So what if you had business owners that said, hey, I'll match you dollar to dollar. If you go take a Financial Peace University class, I'll kick in $1. You know what I'm saying? Like, so right. For whatever it is, if it's $100, I'll pay 50 just so you can, and you pay the other half, let them have some skin in the game.
Absolutely.
But I care about your personal development. And yes, that does benefit the organization, but I don't think these things have to be mutually exclusive, right?
Well, it's like, you could go, you could take that with you to like underprivileged neighborhoods and teach them how to properly budget and stuff like that. Yep. Because some of it is just not knowing those things.
Yep.
The other half of it is an ability to find a job that works for their family.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's like they're working night shift. They have kids at home that are basically feeding themselves. And so it's like there are some really hard situations that we have in our society that it's like, what are ways that we can better them so that they can live a better life, so that, again, it's not just about, I don't know. It's not just about productivity. It's like
the bottom line,
caring, like you said, just that brotherly love, caring for another person enough to just, hey, I'm gonna walk alongside of you in the hard season.
Yep.
So that I can benefit you.
That's right.
And it's, has nothing to do with your own gain.
So really what we kind of want to do, just as we kind of close this out, is what do you need from community? And I want to give kind of these three things of like what you need from community. Now, as you think about this community could be your faith environment, it could be your home environment, it could be your work environment.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things, particularly as it pertains to work, is many people face burnout. This is interesting. So some studies that are out there talk about how it's not overwork that often leads to burnout, but it's really inadequate challenge. Like people are bored.
Yeah.
And so boredom can be a killer of your organization. And I think boredom in lots of areas of life can really kill some things. So, and that's one of the things about when you're with a tribe, if everybody's kind of moving the same directions, there's inspiration there. So here's the three things. And I got this is a guy by the name of Rick Sessoms, he wrote a book called like Leading a Story-Centric Culture. But this I really wanted to focus in on. He talks about 3 legs of a stool.
Okay.
And really without any one of these legs, you're not developing leaders. And so the 3 legs are this, that you need feedback, challenge, and support. Feedback, challenge, and support. And here's the deal. So think about your organization. You can think about your kids, whatever. Okay, let's just talk about feedback for a second.
Has to be honest.
Okay, it has to be honest. And here's the thing, but it can't be brutal, right? It can't just be cutting someone off like, you did this wrong, fix it, right? Yeah. It can't be that either. So feedback, here's the problem. And I would encourage you, go back and listen to our episode on radical candor if you really want to know how to give good feedback, because I don't want to go too much into this.
Turn it up hot.
Yeah, you can't turn it up hot. And it has to be constructive. There has to be some like hopefulness in it.
Safe communication.
Safe communication, things like that. But the thing of it is, sometimes we'll just throw a person into a role and then go, oh, they're not cutting it. And then just like, oh, go do something else. Well, you never told them what they were doing wrong. Right. You never gave them constructive things. And sometimes things have to be repeated.
Well, so it's interesting that you say this. So I've talked to several different people. I mean, we just, in our church culture, it's like, obviously we have multiple relations with multiple people. And it's been interesting how many people work in jobs that they don't have adequate training. Yeah. And because they don't have adequate training, they're held to a standard that they don't understand. Yep. Or they're held to a standard and they don't have a place to give honest feedback. Yeah. So they can't say to their boss, okay, your expectation, although I understand what you're saying, but you did actually not train me well enough to do that. Absolutely. So I don't understand. I don't understand the expectation that you have because you haven't set me up for that expectation. Yeah. So I feel like in feedback, if it's a boss employer relationship, it definitely needs to have you have to be able to have that back and forth
two-way feedback. It's not just singular. Absolutely.
But in a friendship, it's like you need to be able to ask questions. So if somebody's giving you feedback and they're being honest with you about something, you need to be able to ask the right questions so that you understand what exactly they are saying to you. Because I feel like sometimes you can misunderstand what a person's saying. Yeah. Because you're not quite clicking on all cylinders in relationship to what they're saying.
Something that's interesting in that book, In Everyone Culture, one of the things about feedback in there that they talk about is they talk about giving feedback, but allowing that person to evaluate it. So being clear about letting them evaluate it, because it's giving them the chance to say, what do you think about this? So that they don't feel like they're defined by the feedback that they're getting.
Oh, that's good.
I think a lot of times when we get feedback, we think that this is making a value statement about who I am or am I capable or all that. And I think for there to be good feedback, there needs to be back and forth, right? Because there might be a misunderstanding. There might be, and just because you're correcting something, and we have people that are so sensitive, and again, because we celebrate the individual, we don't see how we are impacting the organization. So sometimes we don't receive good feedback because it's all about us. But the problem is like when you're in better me plus better you equals better us. Yes. Understanding that, hey, I have weaknesses, I have limitations. Am I willing to hear about those things? And am I willing to share? And man, this takes incredible vulnerability, and sadly, not enough people are good at this. But hopefully, things like the legacy lifestyle, hopefully things like the legacy lifestyle will change that. So that's feedback. Quickly, the last couple, we're going a little long here. The last couple then are challenge and support. I would argue that with support, because he talks about feedback kind of being this one way. I would say that if you allow feedback two-way, it allows that person to say things like, hey, I'm not adequately trained, or hey, I need these resources. Right. If you're able to do that, because then that allows that whoever's in the position of authority to say, oh, we can do that, or we can allocate some funds for whatever. Right.
Oh, I can send you to a training.
I can send you to a training.
So you can better understand what you're doing,
or we could change our schedule so that you can get trained on this before work or whatever, And so anyway, then the last thing is I said support. Challenge though, there's kind of a Goldilocks zone, too much challenge, people are going to burn up. Mm-hmm. Too little challenge, they'll burn out, but you want just that you want that place where people are being pushed, right? Where there's a little bit of discomfort, I guess you'd say, discomfort, but it's pushing people to learn. Yeah. Okay.
Well, because finding your tribe has to be benefit.
Yeah, it's got to be.
It has to be a benefit to you as an individual, but you also have to view it as being beneficial to those that you are in community with.
Win-win.
Yes.
How can we make our community win-win?
And it can't be selfish.
Yeah. Eliminate selfishness. And as you think about that, if you're a business owner or you're someone coming out of medical school, right? If you're a doctor coming out of medical school, hey, that's great, but you still need a team.
Yeah.
You need some people that are going to schedule for you. You need some people that are going to,
Well, and when I think about community in relationship to living a legacy, you have your rule of life, you have some of these things that you've put into place, into practice, to help you kind of know the direction of your life.
Yeah.
And it's like you need to find your tribe that will help you go that direction.
Yep.
And don't limit yourself by age.
Yeah.
Don't limit your tribe by age or by race or gender or anything like that. You need to
humans.
Yes, you need humans.
You need humans.
But also, it's like you can find the most valuable, amazing people that are older than you, that have been down the road a little bit further than you, that can give you some adequate feedback that you have no concept because you haven't been there yet. But they have.
Yep.
And so you can benefit from their advice, but you can also go to the younger because they have a little bit more fervor.
Yeah, a little more vigor.
Yes. So it's like they have energy that you need, because they might give you ideas that you didn't think about because it would have never occurred to you because that takes more energy to do that. And they just have that knowledge and they have that energy to come alongside of you and to help you out. So I just challenge you. When you think about making, building your tribe, doing all that, again, don't be selfish, but also don't limit yourself. Don't limit yourself.
I'm already seeing that with our kids, right? They're leveraging technology that, I'm kind of tech savvy a little bit, but it's like, man, I can already tell our kids know more about some things than we do. So it's like, hey, they got to default to you. Hey, Nick, show me how to do this,
Absolutely.
So absolutely. Well, hey, we're going to land it there. Thanks for going through this Legacy Lifestyle series. If you've missed any of them, go back, check out the podcast that you might have missed. Of course, we're on Apple and Spotify, as well as YouTube if you're watching us. So subscribe, share, all that good stuff. Sign up for our mailing list at legacylifestyle.life. We'll catch you next time.